Beneath the sunlit courtyards of Vatican City, past the columns of Bernini's sweeping embrace, there is another world. It is not marked on tourist maps, nor mentioned in the gentle murmur of guided tours. It is a labyrinth of stone, corridors older than the fresco above them, rooms that have never seen daylight. Some are lined with shelves so heavy with age that the air tastes faintly of dust and ink. Others sealed behind doors of iron and locks that whisper when touched. In the hush of those catacombs, amid the scent of parchment and candle wax, lie whispers of a history the world was never meant to hear. Civilizations that came before the first cities of Sumer, long before the rivers of Mesopotamia saw kings rise and fall. Cultures without names in our textbooks, their monuments dissolved into the soil, their languages now dust. And yet perhaps here, their memory survives, pressed into clay, etched on copper, or written in pigments that no alchemist can replicate today. The official record of human history begins around 5,000 years ago, when the Sumerians left behind their wedge-shaped cuneiform tablets. We trace the slow climb from crude tools to complex societies, a steady ascent of knowledge and innovation. But what if this timeline is not a beginning, only a resumption? What if entire ages came before, rising to greatness, mastering arts and sciences, then vanishing? Their remnants gathered quietly over centuries by hands sworn to silence. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And I'd like to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. The thought of this quiet community stretching across time zones, pondering these mysteries together, is a comfort. And now, let us drift deeper into the heart of the unspoken, into the possibility that the Vatican, that ancient guardian of faith and knowledge, might hold the keys to a past more profound, more unsettling than any of us dare to imagine. The story of forgotten languages is not merely a tale of lost words, but of lost worlds. We believe the story of human writing begins with Sumerian cuneiform, some 5,000 years ago, a revolutionary script born from the need to record grain and taxes in the Fertile Crescent. But what if this wasn't the first spark of literacy, but a flickering ember rekindled from an earlier, almost entirely extinguished fire? The archaeological record, for all its meticulous layering, occasionally yields fragments that defy this neat timeline. Across ancient Anatolia, in the fertile valleys that cradled early human settlements, there are hints of symbolic systems far older than Sumer. Take the Vinca culture, which flourished in southeastern Europe around 7,500 years ago. Its small ceramic tablets bear intricate, repeated symbols that suggest not mere decoration, but a deliberate, structured form of communication. Scholars call it proto-writing, a precursor, a tentative step towards true language. But what if it was more? What if these seemingly isolated marks were fragments of a much larger global tradition of symbolic communication, a silent language spoken across vast prehistoric networks? It is here that the Vatican's shadows begin to deepen. Whispers persist of ancient texts hidden deep within the Vatican Apostolic Archives, documents catalogued in obscure Latin, far from public access. Among them, it is said, are references to lamina figline ante Babylonica, clay plates with signs before Babylon. These are not Sumerian, not Egyptian, not Indus Valley script. They are, according to the few scholars who have allegedly glimpsed them under strict oaths of silence, linear sequences arranged in a left-to-right order, subtly hinting at celestial bodies or abstract concepts. Their origin columns are mysteriously blank, their acquisition records frustratingly absent, as if the Church has long served as a silent custodian of knowledge deemed too volatile for the public gaze. One particularly intriguing rumor, whispered among independent epigraphers and linguistic historians, concerns a collection of stone weights, allegedly recovered from collapsed caverns beneath the Sinai Peninsula in the early 20th century. Their carvings, unlike any known Egyptian or Mesopotamian motifs, bore geometric elegance, abstract symbols that seemed to function as both art and precise measurement tools. The story goes that these weights, once sent to Rome for further study, vanished from public record. Only faint sketches remain in the journal of an Italian engineer who himself, after returning from the expedition, was never heard from again. Was this merely an unfortunate loss, or a deliberate act of concealment? The silence feels deliberate, a quiet burying of evidence that might unravel established narratives.
The inherent challenge with these anomalies, whether the Vinci tablets or the alleged Sinai weights, is context. Without a Rosetta Stone, without a broader cultural framework, even genuine fragments of an ancient script remain stubbornly undecipherable. Yet, the consistency of some symbols across geographically disparate regions, a spiral from the Sahara mirrored in a motif from Neolithic Anatolia, raises compelling questions. Could these be mere coincidences, the natural recurrence of universal human patterns of thought? Or could they be echoes of a much older, unified system, a global script predating the linguistic fragmentation that followed catastrophic global events? The Vatican, with its long history of collecting and preserving texts from every corner of the world, often through missionary accounts and colonial expeditions, is uniquely positioned to possess such fragments. If a comparative project, as rumored, was indeed undertaken in the early 20th century to cross-reference these proto-writing marks into a master index, its findings could be explosive. Imagine a unified linguistic tapestry weaving together seemingly unrelated ancient cultures, proving a level of global connection thousands of years before recorded trade or empire. To unveil such a truth would not merely expand our timeline, it would shatter it, forcing us to rethink the very genesis of human communication and the origins of civilization itself. And perhaps for institutions invested in a particular timeline, that threat is reason enough for silence. The narrative of our planet's shifting geography is often told as a slow, inexorable march of millennia. Yet ancient maps and whispered texts within the Vatican's deep vaults hint at a far more dramatic past, a time when coastlines defied modern understanding, when vast lands now submerged were once fertile plains, and when a global flood, far from being mere myth, reshaped the world, erasing entire civilizations from the visible record. The most tantalizing public clue to this lost world is the Piri-Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. This remarkable chart accurately depicts the coastlines of South America and Africa, a feat for its era. But its most astonishing detail is a southern landmass eerily resembling Antarctica, depicted not as the icebound continent we know today, but as it might have appeared millions of years ago, free of its frozen shroud. How could a 16th century cartographer possess such knowledge of a continent then undiscovered, and in a state it hasn't seen for eons? Piri-Reis himself claimed to have compiled it from 20 older sources, including maps from the Library of Alexandria and charts dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. It is here that the Vatican's deep-seated connection to lost geographical knowledge becomes more than mere speculation. In the less publicized holdings of the Vatican Apostolic Archives, there are rumored to be manuscripts referred to by archivists as the Chronicon Divi, the Chronicle of the Deluge. Written in medieval Latin, but allegedly translated from much older, unknown sources, these volumes describe 9 cities laid upon the plains of an eastern sea, their walls ultimately lost to a great rising of waters. The descriptions are startlingly precise, not allegorical poetry, but accounts speaking of measurements, the number of days the waters took to rise, and how far inland ships could sail. One marginal note, in a later hand, suggests this eastern sea was the Persian Gulf, an area now a shallow seabed, but which geological evidence confirms was once fertile dry land before sea levels rose dramatically after the last ice age.
archaeological surveys have indeed detected ancient riverbeds beneath the Gulf, hinting at vanished settlements along their banks. Yet, curiously, no extensive public excavation has ever been conducted there, leaving the region archaeologically silent. Further intriguing this narrative is an 18th century account from a Jesuit scholar in Basra, who claimed to have seen fishermen pulling carved stones from the Persian Gulf's shallows. These stones, marked with lines and spirals reminiscent of Neolithic pottery found far inland, were, according to the scholar, purchased for the benefit of the Holy See. No such stones exist in public Vatican collections today, though shipping ledgers from that year contain a vague entry for mineralia cum scriptura incognita, minerals with unknown script. The factual anchor for this part of the story is undeniable. Drowned landscapes exist worldwide. From Doggerland, the ancient landmass now submerged beneath the North Sea, to the Yonaguni Monument off Japan's coast, there is no doubt that rising seas at the end of the last ice age consumed vast tracts of habitable land, potentially erasing entire coastal civilizations. The debate centers on whether these were merely scattered communities or sophisticated settlements with organized agriculture and early forms of writing.
The hypothesis, gaining quiet traction among alternative historians, is that some coastal cities, particularly in the Near East and the Pacific, were already centers of advanced civilization before the waters rose. Their destruction would have scattered survivors inland, carrying fragments of their culture, architectural techniques, and navigational skills to new lands, ultimately influencing later civilizations like Sumer. If the Vatican truly holds ancient charts or texts detailing these lost lands and the deluge that claimed them, it would mean our understanding of early human history is profoundly incomplete. The Chronicon Duvi, with its vivid descriptions of a drowned world, suggests a direct, perhaps eyewitness, account of such a catastrophe. Even more unsettling is a cryptic remark found in the margins of one volume. The tablets say this was not the first time. This implies an even deeper cycle of cataclysm, that floods had erased cities before, and that the one remembered here was simply the most recent in a long lineage of planetary resets. Such a record, immune to the malleability of oral tradition, would be a fixed point in the haze, a direct challenge to the accepted chronology of human civilization. The sea, the eternal keeper of secrets, guards these drowned worlds. And in Rome, in its vast, silent archives, the Church may hold the quiet written testimony that the world once was and then was not, in ways we are only now beginning to imagine. Beyond the shifting sands and beneath the silent waves, there are other whispers, hints of technologies that defy the timelines of human progress. We chart our ascent from the Stone Age to the Bronze, then to Iron, each era marked by our mastery of increasingly complex materials. Yet the archaeological record is not always so neat. Scattered reports, often dismissed or quietly filed away, speak of metals and alloys that should not exist in the eras from which they supposedly come. This is the puzzle of the out-of-place artifacts, the opts, a collection of enigmas that, according to persistent rumors, includes perplexing examples preserved within the Vatican's most inaccessible vaults. Consider the curious case of the metallic spheres found in South African mines, often cited by fringe theorists. These small, grooved objects, discovered in Precambrian rock strata over 2 billion years old, seem to resist easy explanation. Mainstream geology attributes them to natural concretions, mineral accumulations formed under immense pressure. Yet the unusual symmetry and persistent grooves continue to spark debate, fueling the imagination of those who wonder if they are remnants of an unimaginably ancient, non-human technology. While these particular spheres are likely natural, their story underscores a crucial point. The Earth's deep past is capable of producing forms that mimic advanced design, making definitive identification of true opts incredibly challenging without direct context. More directly linked to the Vatican's rumored holdings is an account from the 19th century.
An Italian missionary in Anatolia reportedly discovered a small, flat ingot of golden bronze metal among ruins tentatively dated to the Neolithic period. The ingot bore a repeating pattern of stamped symbols unlike any known scripts. Instead of being submitted to local authorities, it was shipped directly to Rome as part of the missionaries' cultural gifts to the Curia. In Vatican inventory ledgers, a single vague line survives: Lamina vetustissima aerea regia incertum, a very ancient bronze plate, origin uncertain. If this ingot was indeed Neolithic, it would dramatically predate the known Bronze Age by millennia, suggesting a lost metallurgical tradition. Another intriguing, though tangential curiosity is the Baghdad battery, a clay jar with copper and iron components found near Baghdad and dated to the Parthian era, around 250 BCE to 224 CE. While mainstream archaeology debates its function, perhaps a ritual object or merely a storage vessel, some researchers argue it could have produced a small electric current, suggesting a rudimentary knowledge of electrochemistry in antiquity. This does not predate human civilization, but it challenges the linear progression of technological development, forcing us to ask what other advanced yet forgotten technologies might have existed. The Vatican's archives, with their vast collection of records from ancient Mesopotamia and the Near East, might contain texts or artifacts that shed light on such anomalies, or perhaps even more direct evidence of pre-human technological feats. The possibility of opts extends to objects that hint at advanced manufacturing or knowledge. Tales, often dismissed as folklore, speak of metal objects found embedded in coal seams millions of years old, nails, chains, or even intricately worked pots. While these are usually explained away as modern intrusions or geological misinterpretations, their persistence in cultural memory and the occasional lack of definitive debunking keep the imagination alive. If a civilization existed tens or hundreds of millions of years ago, its technological footprint would likely be subtle, perhaps microscopic, scattered fragments of advanced alloys or synthetic compounds easily mistaken for unusual mineral deposits or natural variations in the geological record.
The hypothesis favored by some fringe scholars and occasionally whispered in certain clerical circles is that long before Sumer, there existed a metallurgical tradition capable of producing alloys with properties we are only now beginning to replicate. Such a tradition, perhaps the closely guarded craft of a small class of artisans, might have seen its techniques lost in waves of societal collapse, leaving behind only scattered, enigmatic examples. If the Vatican has acquired some of these through its centuries of missionary work, private purchases, or donations, they may represent the only surviving samples of an entire forgotten science. One particularly evocative, though unconfirmed, account comes from an Italian metallurgist in the 1960s who claimed to have been invited to examine a small collection of ancient metals from undisclosed locations within the Vatican. He described a fist-sized ingot with a metallic luster unlike gold or copper, heavier than lead, yet untarnished despite obvious antiquity. Its surface bore faint intersecting lines, as though it had been cast in a mold carved with geometric patterns. He took no samples, permission was not granted, but he left convinced that the alloy was neither accidental nor known to modern metallurgy. Why would such finds be withheld from public research? Beyond the uncertainty of context or lack of rigorous provenance, there is the matter of theological implications. Artifacts showing complex metallurgy or advanced engineering in a period when humans are thought to have been primitive could destabilize the conventional chronology that underpins much of historical and religious teaching. The revelation of a technologically advanced pre-human civilization would force a profound re-evaluation of humanity's unique place in creation and its linear path to progress. Somewhere in a Vatican vault, perhaps, there lies a simple object, a cup, a blade, or a block, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. To the untrained eye, it might seem ordinary, But to a metallurgist, a single test could reveal that it should not exist at all in the era from which it came, a silent testament to a hidden past, a fragile inheritance, and a technology that can be gained, lost, and hidden away for millennia. The study of humanity's origins is often a contentious field, marked by fierce debates over skeletal fragments, tool assemblages, and the precise dating of our earliest ancestors. The accepted narrative places Homo sapiens' emergence in Africa around 300,000 years ago, with migration spreading across the globe in successive waves. But what if this narrative is incomplete? What if the Earth holds not just the bones of our direct ancestors, but traces of earlier, perhaps even non-human intelligent species whose existence predates our own by millions of years? And what if within the Vatican's guarded collections there exist physical remnants, out-of-place remains that challenge this established chronology, pointing to a history far stranger than we dare to admit? Reports of anomalous human or hominid fossils, though almost always dismissed, occasionally surface from the margins of scientific literature. In the 1920s, miners in a South African gold reef allegedly uncovered a human skull fragment embedded in rock strata over 2 million years old. The piece, after brief examination by several institutions, was declared an erroneous association, likely the result of a later intrusion into older layers. But those who claimed to have witnessed the original context swore the bone was encased in undisturbed material. The fossil, curiously, disappeared from public view soon after, reportedly sent to a European research institute. Some suspect that this institute was church-affiliated, with close, discreet ties to the Vatican's own vast anthropological collections. A stranger case emerged in 1959 in Italy's Apuan Alps. Quarrying workers breaking limestone for cement found a human femur alongside the fossilized remains of Pleistocene fauna, giant deer and extinct bovids, in a sealed fissure. The geological dating of the fissure placed its closure at least 100,000 years ago, far earlier than the accepted arrival of anatomically modern humans in the region. The femur was removed, studied briefly, and then quietly archived. A single handwritten note survives in a regional museum stating simply, "transferred to Rome for ecclesiastical study." Such a move, outside standard academic protocols, fuels the persistent rumor of a secret collection known informally among a small circle of clerics as the bones of the before. A set of human or hominid skeletal remains kept in a sealed cabinet in the lower levels of the Apostolic Palace, allegedly dating to periods far predating current human origins. The factual anchor here is the undeniable, though highly debated, existence of what some call out-of-place hominids. While mainstream science usually finds conventional explanations for such finds, intrusive burials, geological disturbances, or mislabeling, a small number remain stubbornly unexplained, sitting quietly as anomalies in the vast academic literature.
The potential theological implications for the Vatican are immense. If these remains genuinely prove human or human-like presence tens of thousands or even millions of years before accepted timelines, it could challenge not only scientific narratives of human evolution, but also certain religious interpretations of humanity's unique creation and place in history. For an institution that is historically engaged deeply in debates about human origins, such evidence would demand careful, discreet consideration before any public release. Adding another layer to this mystery is an off-topic but related curiosity from the archives of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. In the late 19th century, a Jesuit naturalist reportedly published a series of sketches of skeletal remains, claiming they were from ancient peoples of unknown antiquity, found during missionary expeditions in Asia. The publication was quickly withdrawn and the printing plates destroyed. But surviving copies of the sketches reportedly showed skulls with unusual proportions, broader crania and flatter faces, unlike any known human population.
Whether these were misinterpretations, deliberate exaggerations, or genuine representations of lost lineages remains impossible to confirm, but their very existence and the subsequent suppression heightens the intrigue. The hypothesis whispered in certain academic and esoteric circles is that over centuries, the Church has quietly amassed a collection of physical evidence of intelligent presence on Earth far older than accepted history allows. These aren't necessarily full skeletons, but fragments, a jawbone, a metacarpal, a tooth, each meticulously catalogued in Latin on accompanying parchment tags, their geological provenance placing them in layers far too old for Homo sapiens, according to current models. The decision to keep them hidden is complex, partly due to their fragility and lack of context for wider scientific understanding, but perhaps more profoundly, to avoid the cultural and theological shock that such revelations could unleash. To accept that another, perhaps non-human, intelligent species existed and vanished before our time, leaving only these silent, bone-deep echoes, would force a re-evaluation of our very identity. In the cool, dry chambers beneath St. Peter's, where light falls in thin golden shafts through dust-laden air, there may be a drawer lined in red velvet. Inside, tagged in Latin, could rest a fragment of bone, its mineralized surface telling a story of a life lived tens of millions of years before the first known city was built. It is a story that, for now, remains locked away in silence. Long before the kings of Sumer recorded their conquests in baked clay, and before the first armies marched across the Fertile Crescent, there are whispers of an older craftsmanship, a monumental architecture whose scale and precision defy the accepted timelines of human ingenuity. We speak not of palaces or temples with grand inscriptions, but of the silent, weathered bones of cyclopean walls and fortresses that stand without a written claim to their origin. Their craftsmanship is so advanced that even modern engineers pause to consider their precision, yet no surviving record tells us who they were. What if these structures are remnants of civilizations that preceded not just recorded history, but perhaps humanity itself? In the highlands of Peru, cyclopean walls rise from the earth in seamless polygonal fits. Each massive stone, some weighing over 100 tons, is so perfectly shaped that even a blade of grass cannot slip between them. In Greece, the so-called Mycenaean walls at Tiryns and Mycenae, built of colossal blocks, also defy easy explanation. Across the Mediterranean, in places like Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and the fortresses of the Nuragic culture in Sardinia, the same uncanny mastery appears. Different continents, separated by thousands of miles and millennia, yet sharing remarkably similar techniques. These anomalies challenge the conventional narrative that such precision required tools and knowledge that simply didn't exist until much later in human history. In North Africa, scattered amid the dunes of Algeria and Libya, there are low, weathered ramparts made of enormous stone blocks, some with beveled edges that match no known historical period in the region. Most are attributed to local tribes or early Berber kingdoms, yet carbon dating of organic material trapped between the stones often returns results far older than those cultures' known presence. The factual anchor here is that advanced stone cutting and polygonal masonry techniques did exist in the ancient world, but in most places they appear suddenly, without a clear developmental lineage. Historians still debate whether these techniques arose independently in different parts of the world or spread through a shared, now lost cultural network. The lack of transitional phases, simpler examples evolving into complex forms, remains an unresolved puzzle. It is within this gap that the Vatican's rumored holdings cast their long shadow.
Among the inventory ledgers of the Archivum Secretum are a handful of entries in Latin, referring to fragmenta murum priscue modo fabricatorum, or fragments of walls constructed in an ancient manner. These entries, though sparse in detail, note the provenance as Mediterranean islands and beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The implication is that Vatican agents or affiliates may have acquired pieces of ancient masonry, either for study or as relics of lost engineering traditions, perhaps even from a time before human hands were thought capable of such feats. A strange event occurred in 1894 when a papal-sponsored archaeological mission to the island of Malta reported discovering a buried chamber beneath the Hagar Kim temples. Inside, they claimed, was a section of wall built from stone blocks unlike the temple's own architecture, larger, smoother, and laid without mortar. No official excavation record exists, and within a year, the chamber was sealed again due to instability. Whispers among those involved suggest that a carved lintel stone was removed from the site and shipped to Rome, where it was stored in a climate-controlled case within the Vatican's anthropological collection. The hypothesis favored by some researchers is that these massive masonry traditions, from the Andes to the Mediterranean, are not isolated inventions, but the fading echoes of a shared architectural knowledge passed down from a pre-Sumerian, perhaps even pre-human civilization. Such knowledge would have included not only the shaping of immense stones, but also techniques for transporting them and fitting them so precisely that they have survived earthquakes and centuries of weathering. An off-topic but curious connection emerges from an unpublished manuscript held in the Vatican Library, attributed to a 16th century Spanish chronicler. In it, he describes visiting a fortress in the New World whose walls matched the old stones of Iberia in form and precision. The chronicler speculates that these builders, separated by oceans, must have shared a parent craft. The manuscript was never printed, and the sole surviving copy remains in restricted access.
Historians still debate the origins of polygonal masonry. Some suggest it arose from practical needs in seismic zones, where interlocking stones resist collapse better than straight courses. Others believe it reflects a ritual or symbolic meaning, with each unique stone representing a cosmic order. But the absence of written plans, tools, or experimental stages leaves open the possibility that the skill was inherited rather than invented. If the Vatican does indeed preserve fragments, sketches, or even surviving blueprints of these construction methods, they would represent a rare and irreplaceable link to a period of Earth's history that straddles the border between legend and fact. The decision to keep them hidden could be as simple as a lack of context, artifacts without a clear narrative, or as deliberate as a choice to avoid fueling speculative theories about vanished global civilizations, or even pre-human ones. Somewhere in the deep vaults, perhaps, rests a smooth, beveled stone no larger than a man's hand. To most eyes, it would be just a rock, but under close examination, its cut and angle would match in perfect miniature the colossal wall standing in Peru or the highlands of Greece, a mute witness to a craft whose name and the people who practiced it have long since been lost to the wind. Beyond the monumental stones and cryptic scripts, the very elements of the earth themselves offer clues, not in their natural state, but in forms that suggest deliberate manipulation. In the accepted timeline of human history, metallurgy appears in a predictable sequence: copper first, then bronze, and finally iron, each marking a leap forward in technology and social complexity. Yet there are scattered reports, most dismissed or quietly filed away, of metals and alloys that should not exist in the eras from which they supposedly come. This is the puzzle of the metal that shouldn't exist, and in certain corners of scholarly rumor, it is whispered that the Vatican has preserved some of the most perplexing examples, hinting at a technological past far older than Sumer.
Modern archaeometallurgy has confirmed that the oldest known smelting of copper occurred in the Balkans around 5000 BCE, and the earliest true bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, emerged in Mesopotamia a millennium later. But what if there are artifacts predating both, whose composition suggests not only smelting, but complex alloying processes, pushing the dawn of metallurgy back by tens or hundreds of thousands of years, or even into a pre-human epoch? One of the most famous public anomalies, though still within the human era, is the Delhi iron pillar in India, dating to around 400 CE, which resists corrosion far better than modern steel due to its high phosphorus content and unique forging method. That alone is not enough to rewrite deep history, but there are less publicized finds that strain the sequence further. In the 1940s, miners in Bolivia unearthed a small, hammer-like object encased in a solid nodule of sandstone. Initial tests suggested the metal head was a high-purity iron alloy, supposedly impossible to produce in the prehistoric period. Mainstream archaeology dismissed it as a modern intrusion into ancient strata, but the object's whereabouts today are unclear. Some accounts claim it was sent to Europe for further study under the auspices of a Catholic institution.
The Vatican connection surfaces more clearly in the 19th century when a missionary in Anatolia purportedly discovered a small, flat ingot of golden bronze metal among ruins tentatively dated to the Neolithic period. The ingot bore a repeating pattern of stamped symbols, unlike known scripts. Instead of being submitted to local authorities, it was shipped directly to Rome as part of the missionary's cultural gifts to the Curia. In Vatican inventory ledgers, a single vague line survives: Lamina vetustissima area regia, originis incerte, a very ancient bronze plate, origin uncertain. If this ingot truly dates to the Neolithic, it would imply a mastery of metalworking that profoundly reshapes our understanding of early technology. A stranger and off-topic case, but one often tied to these rumors, is that of the so-called meteoric blades found in several elite burials across the ancient world. The most famous is the dagger from Tutankhamun's tomb, forged from meteoritic iron over 1,000 years before the Iron Age began in Egypt. The use of meteoric iron is not inherently mysterious. Its high nickel content made it workable without smelting. But there are scattered reports of meteoric alloys combined with other metals, a feat requiring intentional melting and mixing at temperatures supposedly beyond the reach of Bronze Age furnaces. One such blade, described in an unpublished paper by a 1920s Jesuit archaeologist, was said to have been recovered from a collapsed tomb in the Caucasus region and brought to Rome for preservation. The factual anchor here is that metallurgy often appears earlier in small, isolated cases than in the mainstream archaeological record, as new finds push back the first dates for smelting in various regions. Historians still debate whether isolated advanced artifacts represent independent invention, accidental creation, or contact between cultures much earlier than believed. The hypothesis most tantalizing to fringe scholars is that there existed, long before Sumer, a metallurgical tradition capable of producing alloys with properties we are only beginning to replicate. Such a tradition could have been the closely guarded craft of a small class of artisans, its techniques lost in waves of societal collapse, leaving behind only scattered examples. If the Vatican has acquired some of these through missionary work, private purchase, or donation, they may represent the only surviving samples of an entire forgotten science, perhaps one that belonged to a pre-human intelligence. One particularly evocative account comes from an Italian metallurgist who, in the 1960s, claimed to have been invited to examine a small collection of ancient metals from undisclosed locations within the Vatican. He described a fist-sized ingot with a metallic luster unlike gold or copper, heavier than lead, yet untarnished despite obvious antiquity. Its surface bore faint lines intersecting, as though it had been cast in a mold, carved with geometric patterns. He took no samples, as permission was not granted, but he left convinced that the alloy was neither accidental nor known to modern metallurgy. Why would such finds be withheld from public research? One explanation could be the uncertainty of their context. Without secure archaeological provenance, their significance would easily be challenged. Another is the theological implication. Artifacts showing complex metallurgy in a period when humans are thought to have been primitive could destabilize the conventional chronology that underpins much of historical teaching. And, especially if they hint at a non-human origin, they could profoundly challenge humanity's unique narrative. Somewhere in a Vatican vault, perhaps, there lies a simple object, a cup, a blade, or a block, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. To the untrained eye, it might seem ordinary, but to a metallurgist, a single test could reveal that it should not exist at all in the era from which it came. A reminder that technology is not a one-way road from ignorance to mastery, but a fragile inheritance that can be gained, lost, and hidden away for millennia. The true measure of a civilization's advancement isn't solely in its immediate output, but in its capacity to store and transmit knowledge across generations. Long before the Library of Alexandria gathered scrolls from across the known world, before its vast holdings burned in the wars of empires, there may have been another repository of knowledge, one older, more complete, and long since vanished. The idea of a great library before Alexandria seems at first like wishful imagination. But if certain traditions, half remembered in ancient sources, suggest that there once existed a central archive of Earth's knowledge in a time when most of the world's cities had yet to be built, perhaps even before humanity's recognized dawn, Greek historians occasionally hinted at this possibility. Diodorus wrote of Egyptian priests who claimed their own archives went back tens of thousands of years, recording the reigns of divine and mortal kings alike. Plato, in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, mentioned Egyptian records far older than Greece's oldest myths, supposedly preserved in the temples of Sais. Such stories are usually framed as exaggerations, but if even part of them is true, they point to a tradition of record-keeping that stretches far beyond the birth of Sumer, perhaps even encompassing a pre-human epoch.
The factual anchor here is that ancient civilizations did maintain archives. Clay tablet libraries in Mesopotamia, temple scroll rooms in Egypt, and stores of oracle bones in China. But what is debated is the true age of these traditions. Historians still debate whether systematic record-keeping emerged independently in each early civilization, or if it was inherited in fragments from an earlier unknown source. The Vatican's shadow enters this story through its own centuries-long role as an accumulator of knowledge. The Church, since its earliest centuries, has received manuscripts and relics from distant lands, sometimes as gifts, sometimes as spoils, sometimes as private acquisitions by missionaries. In the Archivum Secretum, there are rumored to be several bound codices, described in inventories as translationes ex libris antiquis ante Alexandrinum incendium, translations from ancient books before the burning of Alexandria. The wording is tantalizingly vague, offering no details about what these books contained, nor how they were obtained. This implies a collection of knowledge that predates the commonly accepted timeline of human intellectual development, possibly containing information from a truly primeval age. A strange event from the late 18th century adds weight to these whispers. In 1789, a Jesuit scholar in Malta claimed to have been entrusted with several sealed chests recovered from a collapsed chamber beneath an old fortress. The chests contained rolls of papyrus, so brittle they could not be unrolled without crumbling. The scholar reported that some bore scripts resembling early hieratic Egyptian. Others were in unknown characters. Lacking the means to preserve them on the island, he sent the chests to Rome for special care. There is no public record of their arrival, but 2 years later, Vatican acquisition logs include an entry for volumina papyri vetustissima ex insulis Mediterraneas, very ancient papyrus volumes from Mediterranean islands. If these texts indeed contained non-human or pre-human records, their contents could redefine our understanding of Earth's intellectual heritage. The hypothesis among certain researchers is that at least part of a pre-Alexandrian, indeed a pre-human library's contents survived, not in one place, but dispersed after the destruction of the original. If a fragmentary collection made its way into ecclesiastical hands centuries or millennia later, it could explain the persistence of advanced ancient knowledge in later religious and philosophical traditions. An off-topic but curious parallel exists in the medieval Book of Soiga, a treatise on magic and mathematics owned by John Dee in the 16th century. For centuries, the book was thought lost, until 2 copies were found in the British Library and the Bodleian Library. Some Vatican scholars privately noted similarities between its content and certain diagrams held in restricted archives, suggesting that such esoteric survival sometimes mirrors older, hidden sources. Why would the Vatican guard possible fragments of an older great library? Partly because of their fragility. Ancient papyrus and vellum can survive only under the most controlled conditions. But there may also be profound theological concerns. A corpus of texts older than the traditional timeline of history, possibly containing myths, histories, or sciences at odds with later scripture, or hinting at non-human intelligent predecessors, could provoke widespread controversy or be misunderstood without context. In the quiet, climate-controlled depths beneath Vatican City, there may rest a roll of papyrus whose fibers still hold the ink of an unknown scribe, perhaps writing in a language no one alive can read. The words could speak of cities no longer on any map, of rulers whose names never entered the annals of recorded history, of star charts drawn before the constellations had their present shapes, or of scientific understanding far beyond our own. Such a document would not simply predate the Library of Alexandria. It would rewrite the very foundation of our understanding of how intelligence and memory had been preserved on Earth. Across the deep reaches of recorded myth, there are stories of things falling from the sky, not gentle rain or snow, but fire, stone, and ruin. In some accounts, these events are divine punishments. In others, they are mere omens. Yet modern science has confirmed that catastrophic meteor impacts have reshaped Earth more than once in its history, sometimes during periods close enough to leave cultural scars. Among the oldest of these scars, preserved in both oral traditions and geological layers, are the so-called Starfall Chronicles, accounts of great disasters written in the language of both myth and history. What if these ancient stories, echoed in hidden Vatican texts, speak not just of human suffering, but of catastrophes that wiped out civilizations long before our species emerged? In the Mesopotamian Enuma Elish, the heavens are not just a stage for gods, but an arena for violent upheavals. In ancient Chinese annals, fire stars blaze across the sky before dynastic collapses. And among the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, there are songlines describing the day the sun fell twice.
a poetic but remarkably accurate depiction of a meteor's arrival and the secondary explosions it caused.
These traditions often preserve details, color, sound, even sequence, that match what modern witnesses have reported in recent impact events. The factual anchor here is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a theory that around 12,800 years ago, fragments of a large comet struck or exploded over multiple regions of Earth, triggering rapid climate cooling, megafaunal extinctions, and perhaps societal collapse among early human cultures. While the hypothesis remains controversial, geological evidence from North America, Greenland, and the Middle East includes microscopic spherules, nanodiamonds, and layers of soot consistent with massive firestorms. Historians still debate whether the event was global in scale or a series of regional catastrophes, but the possibility of such a devastating celestial event impacting a highly advanced pre-human civilization is tantalizing. Where then does the Vatican enter this story? Through a set of manuscripts known in restricted catalogs as the Liber de Celesti Ruina, the Book of the Heavenly Ruin. Bound in leather so dark it appears almost black, its pages are filled with Latin translations of much older texts, some of which are said to be fragments from Near Eastern and Mediterranean sources. The Liber reportedly describes a rain of fire from the north and waters that rose to meet the falling stars, language suggestive of an impact followed by flood events. What makes it more compelling, if the accounts are genuine, is the mention of cities laid down in rings and fields of shining stone that were melted as wax in the aftermath. This description, evocative of advanced urban centers, echoes Plato's account of Atlantis and could point to a civilization far beyond human comprehension. A strange event in the late 19th century brought the Liber briefly into academic conversation. A Jesuit astronomer lecturing in Paris, speaking off-record to colleagues, hinted that the Vatican possessed a text describing a great burning in the days before the oldest empires. When pressed, he refused to elaborate, saying only that the source was not yet for public eyes. Within months, he was reassigned to South America, and no further mention of the document appeared in his published work. The off-topic but related curiosity here is the existence of ancient impact craters whose dating overlaps with formative periods in Earth's deep history. The Webar crater in Saudi Arabia, for example, shows signs of a meteorite strike in the last few thousand years. Yet local Bedouin oral tradition describes it as the place where the star fell and the sands turned to glass. Similar desert glass fields in Egypt's Libyan desert, used by ancient artisans for jewelry, are now believed to have formed in intense heat from atmospheric explosions millions of years ago. The hypothesis favored by some is that the Vatican's Liber de Celesti Ruina may preserve accounts from literate or technologically advanced pre-human cultures that were obliterated by one of these events. Such a record could be the only surviving first-hand testimony of a catastrophe predating even the earliest known human-written civilizations. The mention of cities in rings in particular has drawn comparisons to Plato's account of Atlantis, though whether the similarity is coincidence or common mythic inheritance is unknowable without seeing the original text. Historians still debate whether ancient accounts of fire from the sky are literal or symbolic. The difficulty lies in the fact that impacts, while rare, are inevitable over geological timescales, and even a single regional event can alter climate, food sources, and political stability. Yet without clear physical correlation to specific stories, the line between history and allegory blurs. Why would the Vatican preserve such a document? Without corroborating evidence, it would be seen as just another apocalyptic myth.
Or perhaps it contains descriptions that, if confirmed, would force a reconsideration of Earth's vulnerability to such events, and the idea that whole civilizations, human or otherwise, could vanish in a single day, their only memorial a half-forgotten manuscript in a locked vault. In the controlled stillness beneath Vatican City, it is easy to imagine a table lit by a single lamp, the Liber de Celesti Ruina open to a page where ink drawings depict a black sky, raining streaks of white fire over a coastline whose shape no longer exists. The scribe who copied it centuries ago may not have understood what he was preserving, only that it was important. And perhaps somewhere in the real world, a crater or a glass-strewn plain still waits to be matched to those ancient, chilling words. In the deep cold of Earth's polar regions, the ice has a memory. It holds, layer by layer, the dust of ancient deserts, the ash of forgotten volcanoes, and the faint chemical traces of climates long gone. Beneath the glaciers, entire landscapes sleep in darkness, their rivers frozen in place, their mountains hidden under miles of compressed snow.
Modern science has only begun to peer into these hidden realms with radar and seismic imaging. But in the realm of speculation and in whispers tied to the Vatican's most inaccessible vaults, there exists a far stranger suggestion that beneath these icebound worlds lie the remnants of civilizations older than any in recorded human history, perhaps even pre-human. The idea of a kingdom beneath the glaciers has always carried a mythic weight. In Norse sagas, there are lands beyond the ice, ruled by ancient powers. In Tibetan tradition, there is Shambhala, a hidden realm of enlightenment, often placed beyond great mountains or within lands of eternal frost. Even the Greeks told of Hyperborea, a blessed place far to the north, warmed by a sun that never set. While historians treat such accounts as allegory or cultural metaphor, some researchers note that they could be distorted memories of real places, seen or remembered before the last ice age swallowed them. The factual anchor here comes from recent discoveries in Greenland and Antarctica. In Greenland, radar mapping has revealed buried mountain ranges, vast lakes sealed under ice for millions of years, and signs of ancient river systems. In Antarctica, scientists have identified subglacial structures like Lake Vostok, an enormous body of liquid water trapped under more than 3 kilometers of ice. And while no definitive human artifacts have been found there, the preserved landscapes could, in theory, hide traces of earlier life or even advanced habitation. Historians still debate whether human beings could have reached and settled such regions before the onset of the current glacial coverage, let alone a pre-human intelligence. The Vatican's name enters this narrative through a series of cryptic entries in its classified geographical holdings. In a mid-17th century inventory, there is mention of Tabula Septentrionalis Antiquissima, the most ancient northern map, said to depict lands beyond the Great Ice with rivers and habitations. The source of this map is unclear, though a marginal note states it was copied from older originals in a monastery that no longer exists. No image of the map has ever been made public. Such a map, if genuine, would imply a cartographic knowledge of ice-free polar regions from an impossibly distant past, possibly predating our own species. A strange event in the early 20th century adds another layer to the mystery. In 1929, during the same year that the Piri Reis map was rediscovered in Istanbul, a Catholic missionary stationed in southern Argentina reportedly came into possession of a tattered scroll drawn on animal skin. The scroll depicted the southern tip of South America, but extending far beyond it was a detailed landmass, complete with mountain ranges, rivers, and what appeared to be clusters of structures. According to the missionaries' correspondence, the local indigenous informants claimed the mount was from the ancestors who saw the land before the ice. The scroll was sent to Rome for preservation. Its fate is unknown, but several years later, Vatican acquisition logs list an Antiqua Mappa Australis, an ancient southern map. Off-topic, but noteworthy, is the story of the Orontius Phineas map of 1531, held today in the Library of Congress, which also appears to depict Antarctica without its ice sheet. While mainstream historians attribute its accuracy to a mix of guesswork and compilation from earlier coastal surveys, some suggest it hints at older, more accurate sources. If such sources existed, fragments of them could be among the Vatican's guarded cartographic treasures. The hypothesis entertained by more adventurous researchers is that during warmer periods in Earth's climate history, millions of years ago, parts of Greenland and Antarctica were ice-free and habitable. Advanced seafaring cultures, perhaps from now submerged coastlines elsewhere, or even non-human intelligences, could have explored and mapped these lands. If they settled there, their remains are now locked beneath ice, older than the pyramids. A map or written record from that time preserved through successive copies would be the only surviving witness. Historians still debate whether the legends of lands beyond the ice are purely symbolic or faint echoes of ancient exploration. The lack of physical artifacts fuels skepticism, but the possibility of preserved sites under miles of ice remains scientifically plausible, as long as no catastrophic glacial movement destroyed them. Why would the Vatican conceal such materials? The reasoning could be geopolitical as much as theological. Antarctica is bound by international treaties. Any confirmed evidence of ancient settlement, especially one predating human civilization, could trigger fierce disputes over heritage, access, and ownership. Releasing such information without careful preparation might invite a rush of unregulated exploration to one of the planet's most fragile environments, disrupting global stability.
In the stillness beneath St. Peter's, it is not hard to imagine a flat, leather-bound folio resting on a shelf. Inside, drawn in brown ink, could be a coastline lined with symbols denoting cities, rivers winding inward toward a central plateau, and notes in an archaic script no one alive can fluently read. The edges of the folio would be brittle, the parchment smelling faintly of salt and age, as though it had once traveled far over open seas. If real, such a chart would not only expand the boundaries of human history, it would place them far beneath the glaciers, in a kingdom the modern world has yet to see, and whose true inhabitants remain a profound enigma. Through the genealogies of kings and the chronicles of dynasties, history records bloodlines like rivers, branching, merging, ending. Yet there are quieter streams, older and less visible, that carry the inheritance of peoples whose names have faded. Among the most persistent whispers in both folklore and speculative history is the idea that some human or pre-human lineages have survived from a time long before the rise of the Sumerians, direct descendants of a forgotten dawn age. What if the Vatican's meticulous genealogical records, extending far beyond the accepted timelines, hold clues to an unbroken thread of intelligence that predates our own species? The notion of bloodlines from the forgotten dawn is not simply the invention of modern conspiracy theorists. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs claimed descent from gods who ruled in the primeval time. Sumerian king lists speak of rulers who reigned for impossibly long spans before the flood swept over. In the Andes, Inca nobility trace their ancestry to the Viracochas,
pale-skinned, bearded figures said to have emerged from the sea, carrying knowledge of agriculture and building. Whether these tales are metaphor, propaganda, or distorted memory remains debated. The factual anchor here is that genetic studies have revealed lineages within human populations that diverged far earlier than the spread of agriculture. Isolated groups, from the Khoisan of southern Africa to the Ayeta of the Philippines, preserve markers of deep human ancestry. Historians still debate whether certain rare haplogroups in Eurasia might represent survival from very ancient migrations, ones that do not fit neatly into the conventional model of human expansion. If traces of non-human intelligent species were to be found in our deep genetic past, this would profoundly challenge current evolutionary theories. The Vatican's rumored connection to this subject lies not in public anthropological research, but in private genealogical archives. For centuries, the Church kept detailed family records, not only for noble houses, but for entire regions under its influence. Buried within these, some say, are lines that can be traced far beyond the medieval or classical world, through oral histories transcribed by missionaries from peoples on the margins of empires. In the Archivum Secretum, there are said to be scrolls catalogued as Cirrus Sanguinis Antiquissimus, most ancient bloodlines, containing diagrams where names are written in scripts no longer in use, perhaps copied from older originals now lost. This could signify a record of lineages that predate even the earliest known human scripts, perhaps belonging to a pre-human civilization. A strange event in the early 1600s hints at how such records might have been gathered. A Jesuit envoy in the Caucasus wrote to Rome describing a local chieftain who claimed descent from the people before the towers. He presented the envoy with a family tree inked on vellum, its upper branches filled not with personal names, but with glyph-like symbols, each enclosed in a circle. The envoy sent the document to the Vatican, along with notes comparing the symbols to those found on carved stones in the region. No public trace of the vellum remains, though in the 19th century, a Vatican scholar published a cryptic remark about lineages marked by signs, not words. An off-topic but related curiosity comes from certain illuminated manuscripts in the Vatican Library that contain marginal portraits of figures wearing clothing far older than the text period. In some cases, the captions identify them as ancestors of the true kings, or fathers of the world's builders. Whether these images were artistic fantasy or based on remembered tradition is unknown, but their inclusion suggests a fascination with the idea of primordial ancestry. The hypothesis held by some independent researchers is that fragments of genealogical memory, preserved through symbols, oral history, and selective record-keeping, point to the survival of bloodlines from a sophisticated pre-Sumerian culture, or even an earlier non-human intelligence. If such a culture fell suddenly, its survivors might have been absorbed into younger societies, their heritage recorded in ways only their descendants understood. Over millennia, these records could easily pass into the custody of religious institutions, where they would be preserved for both history and prestige.
Historians still debate whether ancient claims of divine or otherworldly descent have any basis in reality. Most agree they served political ends, legitimizing rulers by linking them to mythic ancestors. Yet genetic evidence sometimes produces anomalies, markers in elite burials that do not match the surrounding population, or rare haplogroups turning up in distant and unexpected places. Without careful context, such data can be misleading. But in the hands of an institution with centuries of genealogical material, patterns could emerge that no modern study has yet attempted, potentially revealing an unbroken thread of consciousness extending far beyond our current understanding of history.
Why might the Vatican conceal such findings? The answer could lie in the implications. Evidence of continuous, intelligent lines stretching back to the so-called prehistoric world could challenge not only historical timelines, but also theological interpretations of humanity's origins and uniqueness. It might also reframe the histories of entire regions, granting ancient legitimacy to peoples or claims now forgotten or politically sensitive. Somewhere in a climate-controlled drawer, perhaps, there rests a scroll written in a fading ink, its lines flowing like rivers across a page, branching into names that end in unfamiliar symbols, a key to tracing an unbroken, intelligent thread from the shadow dawn of Earth's conscious history to the present. A thread that has passed through empires, through faiths, through silence, and still exists in living descendants who do not know the weight of the blood they carry. Long before the kings of Sumer recorded their conquests in baked clay, and before the first armies marched across the Fertile Crescent, there are whispers of an older conflict, a war fought between cities whose names have never been read aloud in modern times. In the absence of written records, the War of the First Cities survives as fragments, stories half-buried in later myth, strange archaeological finds in regions with no known history of urbanization, and, according to persistent rumors, a small number of sealed Vatican manuscripts whose accounts suggest these earliest cities may have fallen not to the slow erosion of time, but to fire and deliberate destruction, perhaps even between pre-human intelligent entities. The factual anchor comes from sites scattered across the Near East and South Asia. In northern Syria, the ruins of Tel Brak reveal a settlement that flourished nearly 6,000 years ago, its population larger than most contemporary towns in Mesopotamia. Excavations show sudden layers of burning, followed by centuries of abandonment. In Pakistan's Indus Valley, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, though later than Sumer, show eerily similar patterns of collapse, with abandoned streets and signs of disruption to trade and civic life. Historians still debate whether such destructions were caused by invasion, internal unrest, or environmental shifts. But the scale of these destructions and the abruptness of their disappearance invite darker speculation, especially if they represent early complex societies. The Vatican's possible connection surfaces in an obscure Latin index from the late 17th century, listing a work titled De Bello Antiquissimo Urbium, on the most ancient war of cities. The index entry offers no author's name, only a note that it is a translation from Eastern fragments of unknown age. Those fragments, according to marginal annotations, were written on thin sheets of beaten copper, engraved with both pictorial and abstract symbols. Their provenance is given simply as ex oriente longínquo, from the Far East. A term in early modern Latin could refer to anything from Mesopotamia to the Indus or even further afield. The descriptions in these fragments hint at battles fought with technologies beyond mere bronze, suggesting conflicts of a scale and sophistication that defy the accepted timeline for human warfare. A strange event in the early 1900s deepens the mystery. An Italian archaeologist working in southeast Iran sent a sealed crate to Rome, accompanied by a letter describing tablets of copper, their faces bearing signs of walls, towers, and men in conflict, unlike any script I have known. Shortly thereafter, the archaeologist died of illness before publishing his findings. The crate was logged as received in Vatican shipping records, but there is no further public trace. The hypothesis entertained by some researchers is that these copper plates, if genuine, may depict a conflict between proto-urban centers predating both Sumer and Egypt. The existence of large, organized cities at such an early stage would imply that civilization arose in multiple places at once, rather than radiating from a single cradle. And if these cities fought wars, it would suggest a political complexity far earlier than expected, possibly even involving non-human intelligences. Off-topic but intriguing are
are certain petroglyphs in the Caucasus and Central Asia that show fortifications, siege devices, and lines of warriors with shields and spears.
These carvings are difficult to date precisely, but some appear to predate the Bronze Age. While such scenes could depict myth or ceremony, their detail, including weaponry and defensive walls, hints at familiarity with large-scale conflict. Historians still debate whether warfare is as old as civilization itself, or whether it arose later as a consequence of resource competition in densely populated regions. Some anthropologists argue that early cities may have coexisted peacefully for long periods, bound by trade and ritual ties. Others suggest that the very act of building walls implies the expectation of attack. Why would the Vatican choose to keep such records from public view? One possibility is that the destruction of early cities, if connected to human aggression rather than natural disaster, could complicate theological or moral narratives about the nature of humanity's beginnings, especially if these conflicts were between different, perhaps non-human, intelligent species. Another is that the geographic implications, revealing the locations of these earliest urban centers, could spark contested claims, illicit excavations, or political disputes. If the copper plates truly exist, they may still lie in a drawer somewhere deep beneath the apostolic palace, wrapped in cloth to keep the metal from tarnishing. On their surfaces, perhaps, are the stylized outlines of towers and ramparts, the sweep of walls, and the silhouettes of warriors from an age without a name. A war fought so long ago that only the stones remember. Unless, of course, those who hold the plates know the full story and choose to keep it locked away in silence, preserving a history too volatile to reveal. Among the most unsettling fragments of the forgotten world are those that hint at machines. Not the levers, pulleys, and simple tools expected of early societies, but devices whose complexity suggests a level of engineering that should not have existed in prehistory, let alone in a pre-human epoch. To the archaeologist's eye, a machine is a dangerous word, for it implies industrial technology in an age when most cultures were still shaping stone tools. Yet there are artifacts and depictions, some public, some whispered about, that suggest mechanical ingenuity far older than the accepted timeline allows. What if these are traces of an ancient, perhaps non-human, technological civilization that flourished and then vanished, leaving only these enigmatic echoes? The most famous and least disputed example is the Antikythera mechanism, a Greek bronze device recovered from a shipwreck off the coast of Crete and dated to around 100 BCE. Consisting of intricate gears and dials, it could track astronomical cycles with precision unmatched until the development of advanced clockworks in the medieval period. Its existence proves that ancient human engineers could produce geared mechanisms, but it also raises a troubling question: if such skill existed in the ancient world, what earlier experiments have been lost? Could the Antikythera mechanism itself be a recreation, a faint echo of an older, more sophisticated technology that vanished from the human record entirely? The Vatican's possible connection to older machines is tied to its history of receiving unusual artifacts from missionaries and explorers. In the catalogues of the Archivum Secretum, there is an entry for Instrumentum Aeris Figurae in Salute Inventum in Ruinis Deserti Orientalis, instrument of bronze of unusual shape found in ruins of the Eastern Desert. The record, dated to the late 18th century, offers no description beyond a rough sketch: a circular frame with evenly spaced teeth along its edge, connected to a central hub by radiating arms. Whether this was part of a known device, an ornamental piece, or something else entirely is not clear, but its very existence and the mystery surrounding its origin hinted technologies outside the accepted historical framework. A strange event in 1908 adds more intrigue. That year, a Jesuit archaeological team excavating near the ancient city of Ctesiphon reportedly found a series of cylindrical objects made of a copper shell, an iron rod, and traces of bitumen, similar to what would later be called the Baghdad batteries. These artifacts, if authentic, could have produced small electrical charges when filled with acidic liquid.
While mainstream archaeology regards them as possible galvanic cells used for electroplating, their existence in antiquity remains speculative. The Jesuit team's report, sent to Rome, never appeared in published form, though fragments of the correspondence survive in private archives. This suppression, whether deliberate or accidental, leaves open the possibility that the Vatican has long been aware of technological anomalies that challenge the linear narrative of human progress. The factual anchor here is that ancient engineering was often more advanced than assumed. Roman concrete, for example, has proven more durable than many modern formulations. Water-lifting devices like the shadoof and the Archimedean screw appear in multiple ancient cultures.
Historians still debate whether more complex devices beyond what has been recovered once existed and were lost to time. Off-topic but related are a set of carved reliefs in the Hathor Temple at Dendera, Egypt, which some fringe interpretations claim depict large electric lamps. Mainstream Egyptology rejects this, identifying the images as lotus flowers and serpents in symbolic form. Yet, in private, a handful of engineers have noted similarities between the reliefs and certain high-voltage discharge tubes. Whether this is coincidence, symbol, or deliberate representation of lost technology from a far earlier, perhaps non-human age, remains unresolved. The hypothesis entertained by some independent researchers is that fragments of ancient machines survive scattered across museums and private collections, unrecognized for what they are. If the Vatican has acquired some of these through missionary work, private purchase, or donation, they may represent the only surviving samples of an entire forgotten science. In many cases, such artifacts might be locked away not out of conspiracy, but because they lack sufficient context to be understood, or because revealing them could unleash waves of speculation without definitive answers. Historians still debate whether human technological development has been a steady climb or a series of peaks and collapses. The existence of isolated high-skill artifacts in low-technology contexts supports the latter, moments of brilliance that did not spread, perhaps because their creators were part of small specialized groups whose knowledge died with them, or because they belonged to a civilization that predated humanity entirely. In the dim light of a vault beneath St. Peter's, there may rest a small bronze wheel, its teeth worn smooth by ages, still faintly oily to the touch, as if it once turned in the heart of a forgotten mechanism. Beside it, perhaps, lies a bundle of sketches made by a long-dead scholar who tried and failed to reconstruct its purpose. The wheel may have powered nothing more than a calendar, or it may have been a part of something far stranger, a component of a machine from an age without a name. Until the box is opened, the machine remains only a silent witness to a chapter of history that official timelines do not acknowledge, a whisper of what was, hidden from what we are. Long before the age of satellites and laser surveying, before theodolites and GPS, there were those who measured the Earth with astonishing precision. They could determine latitude without crossing oceans, align monuments to cardinal points with almost no margin of error, and in some cases seem to have known the true circumference of the planet thousands or even millions of years before such figures appeared in accepted human history. This is the mystery of the circle that measures the world, the arcane geodetic knowledge that appears unexpectedly in the ancient record, and which some believe has roots in an even older, hidden, perhaps pre-human tradition.
The factual anchor here is the well-documented precision of certain ancient sites. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, is aligned to true north with an accuracy within a fraction of a degree. Stonehenge's layout marks solstices with millimeter-level consistency. The Nazca lines of Peru extend perfectly straight for kilometers over uneven terrain. Historians still debate whether such feats required advanced surveying methods or could have been achieved through trial, error, and celestial observation. But the sheer scale and accuracy suggest a deeper understanding of the planet's geometry than we attribute to early human cultures.
The Vatican's rumored link to this mystery lies in a set of manuscripts described in its internal geographic catalogs as Tabulae Mensurae Mundi Antiquissime, tables of the most ancient measurement of the world. These are said to contain numerical data recorded in a base 60 system similar to that of the Sumerians, which describe distances between key points on Earth's surface with remarkable accuracy. The provenance of these tables is listed only as ex chartis orientalibus, from Eastern charts, with no surviving reference to the original maps from which they were supposedly derived. Such precision, if it indeed maps the Earth's dimensions with a knowledge of spherical geometry, points to an understanding far beyond the capabilities of the earliest human civilizations, plausibly hinting at an earlier intelligence. A strange event from the 1930s adds an intriguing detail. During an excavation in the Sinai Peninsula, a Franciscan field assistant claimed to have seen a flat stone slab carved with concentric circles intersected by radial lines, each line tipped with symbols resembling mountains, rivers, or suns. Around the outermost circle were numbers in a non-Arabic, non-Roman script. The slab was reportedly shipped to a research facility in Europe, but according to internal correspondence, it was loaned to a Vatican scholar for study. It has not been publicly seen since. An off-topic but relevant curiosity comes from the Eratosthenes calculation. In the 3rd century BCE, the Greek scholar famously calculated the Earth's circumference to within a small percentage of the modern value using only shadow measurements and geometry.
While this is celebrated as a triumph of independent reasoning, some researchers note that his figures align suspiciously well with certain earlier, unverified claims attributed to Egyptian temple records, hinting that advanced geodetic information may have existed long before Eratosthenes formalized it. The hypothesis entertained by more speculative historians is that a pre-Sumerian, perhaps even a pre-human civilization developed a network of fixed observation points, perhaps marked by standing stones or monuments, to measure Earth's size and geography. Such a network could explain the recurring appearance of megalithic sites aligned not only to celestial events, but also to one another across vast distances. If the Vatican possesses fragments of records from this network, measurements, diagrams, or even small models, they would represent some of the most significant evidence for advanced prehistoric science. Historians still debate whether the similarities in site alignments across continents are evidence of shared knowledge or the inevitable result of similar astronomical needs. Yet when specific numeric ratios, such as the 360-degree division of the circle or the precise length of a degree of latitude, appear in disparate cultures, the possibility of cultural inheritance or even a shared underlying intelligence cannot be dismissed entirely. Why would such records be kept hidden? Theological reasons are possible. Precise global measurements before the recognized dawn of human science might challenge traditional narratives of human development and God's unique revelation to humanity. But there are also pragmatic concerns. Releasing partial data without understanding its full context could invite misuse, overinterpretation, or the fueling of unfounded theories. In the quiet heart of the Vatican's deep archives, there could be a scroll, a faded parchment covered in neat columns of numbers, each paired with symbols representing places now buried under seas or deserts. The numbers might match the distances between ancient monuments or between long-forgotten markers aligned to the stars. If genuine, they would prove that someone, long before human history began, had already traced the curve of the Earth and understood that our world was a sphere, measurable, knowable, and finite, perhaps even by a consciousness that predates our own. Before Prometheus stole fire in Greek myth, before the hearth became the center of the home, there may have been other forms of mastery over heat and energy, knowledge that served not only for cooking or warmth, but for processes whose purposes we no longer understand. The phrase, "the sacred fire before Prometheus," has been used by a handful of scholars to describe evidence scattered across archaeology and myth of advanced thermal technologies in deep prehistory. To some, this is merely a poetic way of speaking about early metallurgy and ceramics, but to others, and in certain whispered claims about Vatican holdings, it refers to something stranger: the deliberate harnessing of energy in ways that should not have been possible for the time, potentially by a pre-human civilization. The factual anchor lies in known archaeological anomalies of ancient heat manipulation. At sites like Jericho and Çatalhöyük, plastered floors show signs of sustained, high-temperature firing that seems excessive for simple domestic use. In southern Turkey's Neolithic layers, archaeologists have found kilns capable of reaching temperatures suitable for metal smelting centuries before the first copper artifacts appear. Even more puzzling are vitrified stone walls in Scotland, France, and the Near East that have been partially melted into glass. Historians still debate whether this vitrification was intentional, perhaps for fortification, or the byproduct of catastrophic fires. But the sheer scale of vitrification in some instances suggests technologies capable of immense heat generation, far beyond basic wood fires. The Vatican's supposed connection comes from a small, rarely mentioned collection catalogued under Instrumenta Igni Antiquissimi, instruments of the most ancient fire. These are described in internal Latin inventories as ceramic and metallic vessels lined with an unknown glaze, capable of retaining extreme heat. No further details are given, and their listed origin points are vague, from the eastern deserts and from the southern islands. The implication is that they may have been retrieved during missionary expeditions or acquired through private donation. If these artifacts indeed possess heat-retaining properties beyond human capabilities of their supposed age, they hint at a lost science. A strange event in 1897 adds an intriguing thread. That year, a Benedictine missionary working near the ruins of an ancient fortress in Sudan reported finding a black, glassy basin embedded in the ground. It was so perfectly hemispherical and so resistant to scratching that local workers compared it to the heart of a meteor. The missionary noted that the soil around it was fused into a hardened crust, as if exposed to sudden and extreme heat.
The basin was cut free and shipped to Rome under the pretext of mineralogical examination. No public record of its analysis survives. Off-topic, but relevant, is the long-debated claim about the Ark of the Covenant's supposed dangerous glory, a biblical tradition that some interpret as describing high-voltage discharges or intense heat. While mainstream theology treats such descriptions as symbolic or miraculous, a handful of historians have suggested they could be poetic echoes of ancient, powerful energy devices. Whether or not the Ark was real, such myths suggest that the concept of sacred, dangerous energy has been with humanity since its earliest stories, possibly inherited from an even deeper, more primal understanding of Earth's forces. The hypothesis favored by more speculative researchers is that certain ancient societies, or even pre-human intelligences, may have stumbled upon or inherited techniques for producing and containing extreme heat or energy for specialized purposes. This could include the firing of rare ceramics, the processing of ores unknown to their contemporaries, or even rudimentary chemical or electrical experiments on a scale that left vitrified landscapes. If such knowledge existed, it may have been ritualized, its practical function wrapped in religious ceremony, and its artifacts preserved as sacred relics. Historians still debate whether vitrification and other extreme heat phenomena can be explained entirely by natural or accidental fires. Some suggest lightning strikes or the burning of massive wooden structures as possible causes. But in several cases, the distribution and patterning of the heat damage appears deliberate, as though applied in controlled conditions. Why would the Vatican keep such artifacts hidden? Beyond their fragility and lack of context, there is the matter of interpretation.
Without clear evidence, a vitrified basin or a high-temperature vessel could invite a storm of speculation, from alien theories to dangerous pseudoscience. Better, perhaps, to keep such pieces preserved but unseen until a time when they can be studied without distortion, or when humanity is ready to confront the implications of a technological past that precedes its own. In the lamplit stillness of the archives, one can imagine a shelf lined with small, unassuming objects, a bowl with a glaze that has resisted decay for millennia, a shard of stone whose surface is rippled and glassy, a lump of fused material that might once have been brick. To the untrained eye, they are curiosities, but to the few who have examined them closely, they might represent the last physical proof of a mastery of fire that came and was lost long before Prometheus ever entered the stage of myth. In the chronicles of the Late Bronze Age, history records a shadowy force, known only by the name given them by their enemies, the Sea Peoples. They arrive from the horizon in waves of ships, striking coasts from Anatolia to Egypt, leaving destruction in their wake. Their origins remain uncertain even today, with theories ranging from displaced Mediterranean tribes to the remnants of collapsed kingdoms. But in certain alternative histories, and in whispers attached to the Vatican's more obscure archives, there is an older, more unsettling suggestion that the Sea Peoples were not a unique phenomenon of the Late Bronze Age at all, but the last survivors of a far earlier maritime civilization, one whose memory reaches back before the dawn of written human history, or even to a pre-human intelligent seafaring culture. The factual anchor here is the archaeological record of advanced seafaring in deep antiquity. Obsidian from the island of Melos reached mainland Greece over 9,000 years ago. Lapita culture pottery is found scattered across thousands of kilometers of the Pacific. Egyptian trade routes reached the distant land of Punt more than 3,000 years ago. Historians still debate whether early seafarers were isolated cases of innovation or part of longer interconnected traditions stretching back to a time before agriculture was widespread. What remains elusive is evidence of global maritime cultures operating in the deep ice age, when coastlines were drastically different. The Vatican's name enters this particular narrative through a curious 15th century manuscript catalogued under Itinerarium Antiquissimum Maris, the most ancient itinerary of the sea. The text, written in careful Latin, purports to be a translation of a much older log, describing islands where the sun rises twice, and shores where towers stand like teeth against the waves. The descriptions do not match any known Late Bronze Age accounts. More disturbingly, some match submerged topographies revealed by modern sonar, banks and plateaus that would have been dry land before the end of the last ice age. If these descriptions are accurate, they suggest a cartographic knowledge of prehistoric coastlines, implying a level of ancient seafaring and global exploration far beyond what is currently accepted. A strange event in 1911 lends weight to the rumor. That year, a Franciscan friar stationed on a small island in the central Mediterranean wrote to Rome claiming that fishermen had recovered a bronze prow ornament from shallow waters after a storm.
The piece depicted a human figure wearing a crested helmet and holding what appeared to be a stylized sun disk. Local elders insisted the object was not Phoenician or Greek, but from the old ships, before the ones in the stories. The friar sent the ornament to the Vatican's collection. The shipping receipt survives, but no public record of the artifact exists. Off-topic, but noteworthy, are the many rock carvings found along coastlines in Scandinavia, the British Isles, and the Western Mediterranean, showing long, sleek boats with high prows. Some of these carvings date to thousands of years before the known Sea Peoples. While these could represent simple fishing craft, their scale and stylization hint at vessels designed for long-distance travel, a feature that would not be out of place in a global maritime culture that preceded humanity.
the hypothesis entertained by some is that an early seafaring network existed in the millennia after the last ice age, or even far earlier, when coastlines were vastly different. Rising seas would have drowned many of their harbors, forcing survivors inland or onto islands. In such a scenario, the sea peoples of later history could have been cultural heirs, inheriting shipbuilding techniques, navigational knowledge, and perhaps even fragments of old maps from a much older, lost maritime tradition. If the Vatican possesses artifacts or records from this earlier horizon, they might be the only surviving material evidence of that inheritance. Historians still debate the exact origins of the sea peoples. Egyptian inscriptions call them by names such as Sherdin, Shekelesh, and Peliset, but give no clear homeland. Some scholars believe they were a confederation of displaced groups united by circumstance rather than culture. Others argue for a shared ancestry rooted in an older maritime tradition, one that may have spanned the Mediterranean and beyond. Why might the Vatican withhold such materials? Maritime heritage carries geopolitical weight. Ancient claims to islands, waters, and routes could become contentious in modern politics. Additionally, evidence of an advanced maritime network predating recorded human civilization would challenge the long-held view that early humans were largely land-bound until relatively late in their development. And if such evidence suggested a non-human origin, the implications for human self-perception would be enormous. In a darkened storeroom deep beneath Vatican City, perhaps there rests a long, narrow crate. Inside, cushioned against the centuries, lies a corroded bronze figurehead, the stylized face of a mariner from an age before written history, its gaze still fixed on the endless horizon. If it could speak, it might tell of voyages across seas whose shapes no longer match our maps, and of a people, or a species, who measured their world not by the land they held, but by the waters they could cross. Every civilization has its twilight, a moment when its light dims and the record of its existence begins to fade. In the accepted history of the world, these declines are attributed to familiar forces: drought, famine, invasion, disease. But in the case of the so-called Dawn Age, that hypothesized pre-Sumerian, perhaps even pre-human horizon, hinted at in fragments, artifacts, and whispered Vatican inventories, there is no single clear cause. Instead, what remains is an incomplete puzzle of calamities, each capable of erasing a people, converging until the entire age slipped beneath the surface of history. What if the Vatican's most guarded archives hold the true chronicles of these vanished worlds, revealing a pattern of rise and catastrophic fall that humanity is destined to repeat? The factual anchor here comes from the archaeological record of sudden cultural disappearances. The Varna culture of the western Black Sea, famed for its gold work, vanished around 4500 BCE. The Kukutni Tripilia settlements in Eastern Europe, with their vast proto-cities and intricate pottery, collapsed after 3000 BCE. Across the globe, parallel stories exist. Advanced material cultures that rose abruptly and then ceased without obvious succession. Historians still debate whether these collapses were caused by climate change, resource depletion, or conflict. But the abruptness in some cases suggests a more decisive, perhaps cataclysmic end.
A strange event in 1924 seems to brush against this shadowed history. That year, an Italian ethnographer in the Levant recorded the oral history of a nomadic group whose elders claimed descent from the people of the Red City, a place said to have been destroyed when the 4 signs came in one lifetime. The ethnographer's notes compare these 4 signs, fire, flood, crop failure, and trade collapse, to the sequence described in Tabula Ultima. The notes were sent to Rome as part of the ethnographer's regular reporting, but he never received a reply. Off topic, but worth noting, is paleoclimate study showing that around the mid-Holocene, a series of abrupt climate shifts occurred, including the 5.9 kiloyear event, a rapid drying period believed to have contributed to the fall of Egypt's Old Kingdom and the Akkadian Empire.
If such changes struck a complex maritime-linked Dawn Age civilization, human or otherwise, the effects could have been catastrophic, especially if coupled with natural disasters and disease. The hypothesis most consistent with these fragments is that the Dawn Age was not erased by a single blow, but by a sequence of overlapping crises. In a world without global communication, each region may have perceived its own collapse as unique, not realizing that other centers were falling at the same time. Only in the records of a far-flung trade or religious network, perhaps preserved in the kind of master archive the Vatican is rumored to possess, could the pattern be seen as a whole. Historians still debate whether such patterns are real or the result of our tendency to link unrelated events into narratives. Yet, if the tabula ultima exists, it would be one of the few documents to describe a global collapse before recorded human history, and to do so from the perspective of those who lived through it, providing a unique, perhaps non-human, record of planetary catastrophe. Why might such a document remain hidden? Its implications would ripple beyond archaeology. A detailed account of a global prehistoric collapse could reframe debates about our own vulnerability to cascading disasters. It might also invite perilous speculation about the technologies, alliances, or conflicts of a civilization that left so little behind, perhaps even revealing the existence of pre-human intelligences that vanished. The very idea of humanity as the first and only advanced species on Earth would be profoundly challenged. In the quiet, climate-controlled depths beneath Vatican City, perhaps a flat bundle of vellum lies bound in faded red cord. On its first page, in letters copied by a medieval scribe, are 4 unadorned symbols: fire, wave, stock, and wheel, representing the 4 signs of the end. Beneath them, a single line might read, "And so the cities of the first age were no more." In the architecture of the Vatican's most restricted vaults, there is said to be a single chamber without windows or decoration. Its walls are lined not with shelves, but with tall cabinets of blackened wood, each locked with ironwork so intricate it could be considered art. Within one of these cabinets, so the whispers go, rests a single object, known among a handful of archivists as the Sealed Testament of Ages. It is not a book in the ordinary sense, but a compilation, a collection of copied fragments, sketches, and translated passages gathered together from dozens of sources across centuries, bound together as a coherent whole. If the rumors are to be believed, it ties every scattered clue, every anomalous artifact, every strange manuscript into the outline of a single astonishing narrative, the true history of Earth's intelligent past, far predating humanity. The factual anchor for this part lies in the Vatican's well-documented history of producing compendia. Over the centuries, its scholars have assembled great codices that bring together diverse sources into single volumes, theological concordances, philosophical syntheses, even encyclopedias of natural history drawn from both Christian and pre-Christian texts. If a Dawn Age civilization, perhaps even a pre-human one, had once existed, it would be consistent with Vatican archival practice to consolidate all related material into one master reference, even if it were never intended for public release. The Sealed Testament, if real, would begin in deep antiquity, describing a network of cities, maritime routes, and knowledge centers that flourished before Sumer's first bricks were laid. It would outline their sciences, from proto-writing to metallurgy, from the mapping of the heavens to the measurement of the earth. It would record the catastrophes that befell them, the fires from the sky, the rising seas, the drying fields, and the unraveling of trade. And crucially, it would track their survivors, not in broad mythic strokes, but in lineages, migrations, and the quiet transfer of skills into the hands of the younger human civilizations, revealing an unbroken thread of knowledge from an impossibly distant past. A strange event from the 1950s feeds the legend. A Jesuit historian tasked with cataloging certain miscellaneous manuscripts reportedly found himself working from excerpts that, while labeled in Latin, included detailed drawings of coastlines and city plans not matching any known geography.
Marginal notes identified the source simply as Testamentum Prime Aetatis, testament of the First Age. According to an account later shared with a trusted colleague, the historian was allowed to see only a portion of the manuscript before it was taken away for higher review. Within a year, he had been reassigned to missionary work abroad, and the colleague who recounted the story never saw him again. Off topic, but relevant, are the recurring traditions across cultures of a book of origins, a single sacred record that contains the truth of the world's beginnings. In Mesoamerican myth, the Popol Vuh holds the creation story of the Quiche Maya. In Mesopotamia, the Enuma Elish combines cosmogony with the ordering of kingship. The sealed testament, if it exists, would be an artifact of similar cultural gravity, but not tied to one people alone. It would be a global book of origins, its pages an atlas of a world, and indeed a history of intelligent life we have forgotten. The hypothesis among the few who dare to speak of it is that such a compilation, even in fragmentary form, would irrevocably alter our understanding of Earth's history. It would prove that intelligence is not a single ascent from primitive to advanced, but a cycle, rising, falling, and rising again. That Sumer was not the beginning, but a restart. That the skills we think of as modern are in fact recoveries from older heights. Historians still debate whether a single source could exist to unite the disparate anomalies we see today. The pre-Sumerian ruins, the anomalous maps, the inexplicable metallurgy, the advanced geodesy. Mainstream scholarship leans toward coincidence, independent invention, and the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. But if the sealed testament were real, it would transform coincidence into chronology and pattern into proof. Why would the Vatican keep it hidden? Beyond the theological shock to established narratives, there would be practical concerns, the sudden reevaluation of ancient sites, the rush to excavate fragile regions, the political consequences of redrawing the deep past, and perhaps most fundamentally, the fear that revealing a cycle of civilizational rise and collapse, especially if it involved non-human intelligences, would cast a shadow over our present, a reminder that decline is not an accident of history, but its rhythm. In the imagined silence of that locked chamber, one could picture the sealed testament resting in its case, a thick binding of weathered leather, its spine unmarked, its pages edged in gold leaf, so worn that only faint traces remain. If ever brought to the light, it might tell the entire story, from the first sparks of a primeval intelligence to its final embers, and the faint glow carried forward into Sumer, Egypt, and all that followed. But for now, the testament sleeps, and with it sleeps the possibility of knowing, not just guessing, what came before the first chapter of recorded history. Night settles over the imagined vaults, and over the plains where the first stones once stood, and the long thread of the narrative loosens until it drifts like a ribbon in still air. The rooms beneath the marble remain closed, their hinges do not turn, their guardians do not stir, and whatever rests inside them breathes only the quiet breath of paper and dust. Above ground, the world keeps its ordinary rhythm. Lamps in windows, the hush of streets after evening rain, the gentle weight of sleep approaching, and the older questions fold themselves into that soft, familiar darkness. What has been told becomes a low tide of memory. Cities with ringed harbors and gardens, now seabeds. Maps inked with coastlines that no longer exist. Star tables lit by oils that burnt out long ago. Bones lifted from wrong layers and cradled in cautious hands. Alloys that gleamed when the deserts were green. Each fragment finds another, and together they suggest a silhouette more than a solid figure.
the outline of a civilization that may have grown and learned and faltered and finally vanished, leaving its quiet signals to pass from keeper to keeper. The mind grows calmer as the pieces take their places. Certainty is not required, only the kind of patience that lets unanswered things rest without fear, and the kind of composure that allows wonder to remain wonder, unforced and unharmed. If the sealed cabinet is ever opened, it will open in its time. If not, the story still offers a harbor for thought, a gentle bay where questions can anchor and drift without storm. Breath slows, rooms dim. The last image lingers, a single page turned by a careful hand, and the faintest murmur of vellum as it lies flat. The page does not vanish, it simply quiets, and with it, the long road of the tale grows soft and still. Good night.